Hi, it's Day with Spanglish Generation. Welcome. I invite you to take a look at the content that I share with you on this channel. And if you find value in it, please make sure you go ahead and subscribe and support what I do here. Listen, I have a video that I want to share with you today that I'm going to be reacting to. I saw this video a few months back, and to be honest, I had a visceral, physical reaction to it, as did so many other Cubans that know exactly about the Cuban reality because they have been the victims of the Cuban system. So when I saw this video, I felt insulted and I felt saddened that so many people in the United States still believe in the Cuban socialist slash communist system. I'm going to go ahead and get into it. It's going to take a little bit, so just bear with me. If you know of people that still are being fooled by the propaganda from the communist system in Cuba, please go ahead and share this video with them. The purpose is for as many people as possible to know the real situation in Cuba. I'm going to be thorough and I'm going to go slow, okay? But I want you to get the full perspective because I want to debunk each and every one of the things being said in this video. I knew exactly the things that I was going to say and the examples that I needed to show from the minute that I saw the video. But I want it to be ready and calm. I don't want to be reactive. I want to really show you and educate you if you don't know about the things that so many people are still in the dark about. Okay? Listen. Let me breathe. Let's get into it. Now, this is a video that is shared on a YouTube channel, and it's called, the video is called, You Were Lied to About Cuban Socialism, okay? You Were Lied to About Cuban Socialism. So just off the bat, what an interesting title, right? Let's go ahead and get into it.
So I recently visited Cuba with a brigade of young people from North America, and we visited all kinds of places. We went to schools, cultural sites, villages, even an auto body shop. And I could say a lot about all these things, but if I could only say one thing about what we saw, this is what I would say. The most overwhelming feeling I had while I was there was that I knew in the back of my head that my own government didn't want me to be there. Unlike basically,
let's go ahead and stop for a minute and let's analyze this.
Villages, even an auto body shop, and
brigades. Right off the bat, brigade is a military term, okay? It's a person who's a militant. It is a military term. They don't use the term groups of young people. They don't use that terminology. They use the terminology brigade. And I want to show you two examples of the type of brigades that go to Cuba. Okay, these are called solidarity brigades, and they are organized by groups like Pastors for Peace, Pastores por la Paz. You can look it up online and get into the rabbit hole. We're not going to do that today, but I'm going to show you, for example. Let's go ahead and take a look at this. This is Venceremos Brigade, okay? VB4Cuba.com. Venceremos Brigade. Let me show you this in a more, let's go ahead and, here we go. So this is an overview of the brigade experience, okay? These are brigades of people, groups of American people they take to Cuba. Keep that in mind. The program, while in Cuba, the Venceremos Brigade is hosted by the Cuban Institute for Friendship with the People. Cuban Institute, right off the bat, these brigades are hosted by the Cuban Institute. No institute in Cuba is independent. Every single institute in Cuba belongs to the Cuban regime, which is a totalitarian regime. They're telling you otherwise. You're going to see the full video, but Cuba is a totalitarian regime. Every year, our friends at ICAP develop a program for a 2-week visit to Cuba. Now, let's go and keep scrolling here. The program typically includes meetings with leaders of Cuba's federations. These are all leaders that are approved by the regime. Communist, militant communists in the communist dictatorship, okay? Committees and assemblies such as the Federation of Cuban Women, the Union of Communist Youth, municipal, regional, and national assemblies, and others. So these are all leaders that are part of the Cuban regime, okay? They're all approved. Visits to Cuban social economic institutions such as health clinics, senior centers, orphanages, and others. Now keep in mind, all these institutions and all these places, all these venues are picked. They're hand-picked prior to these people arriving, and they are utilized as places to take these people. They don't take these brigades to regular clinics, to regular schools. No, these are handpicked and prepared by the regime. They also involve cultural activities and visits such as museum visits, musical and dance performances, special events with other solidarity groups and others. Free time, and work, okay? Now, you get an idea of more or less what's going on with these brigades, okay? Let's go ahead and take a look at this particular brigade, which I'm going to show you now, which is July26.org. Maybe in another video, I will get into the history of July 26, which is a terrorist organization. Terrorist organization, 26 de Julio. Okay? A terrorist, domestic terrorist organization. And not only domestic, they've taken their terror outside of Cuba. We will discuss that maybe some other time. It takes an in-depth view and lots of research so I can show you why 26 de Julio, July 26, is a terrorist organization. Nonetheless, our American friends that take brigades to Cuba proudly call themselves July26.org. Huh, very interesting. Why do I want to focus on this particular brigade? Well, because this is the brigade in which our dear friend that is doing this video actually went to Cuba. So you see this picture right here. If you take a closer look, we can see that right in the middle of that group is this person. And he's the person that we see in this video. So right off the bat, we know that the person in this video goes to Cuba with the maybe others, but in this particular case, we're seeing him in the July26.org brigade. Okay? Now, let's keep going. Let's keep listening to what this young man is saying.
I could say a lot about all these things, but if I could only say one thing about what we saw, this is what I would say. The most overwhelming feeling I had while I was there was that I knew in the back of my head that my own government didn't want me to be there. Unlike basically every other country in the world, for the longest time, it was actually completely illegal for US citizens to visit Cuba. And even today, it's heavily restricted.
Yes, that's because Cuba is a communist dictatorship. Why would you want to continue to contribute with money to a communist dictatorship?
And on top of all this, all my life I was told the most over-the-top things about Cuba. That it was this total dictatorship, that there was no freedom in Cuba, that everyone there is starving. And then when you go to Cuba, you realize that all these things just aren't true. There is food in Cuba, obviously.
Let's get into that. There is food in Cuba, obviously. We already took a look at this young man. We saw this is the person that we are seeing in this video, right? So I just want to make sure we're all on the same page, okay? This is the person that goes to Cuba on brigades with, you can see how many people are in that particular brigade. That's a lot of people, okay? That's a large group of people. And they go several times a year, and there are different brigades that go. So it's a large amount of people going to Cuba to get indoctrinated. Okay, now we see this young man right here. That's the young man that's speaking in the video. And he says, well, of course there's food in Cuba. They tell you that everyone is starving in Cuba, but of course there's food in Cuba. These people lied to me. Look at all the food here. Well, first of all, absolutely there's food in Cuba. If not, how would people even make it? Even malnourished, even Of course, there's food in Cuba. Food in Cuba for Cubans is rationed. And what you see here is la libreta de racionamiento, okay? So this is the book where the things get the food that is assigned to you gets written down, and you take this to the bodega, which is the food market, and what is assigned to you, which is a minimum quantity. Okay, each person gets 5 eggs per month. That's basically 1 egg per week. So there is food in Cuba. It's rationed. And even as food is rationed, most of the time, the basic goods are not available in the bodegas. And this food is not free. The ration food needs to be paid for, okay? But there are other sources in Cuba. Absolutely, there are other sources of food in Cuba. How do you think the tourists are going to eat? Yes, there are other sources, including sources for actual Cubans. There are stores that Cubans can go to and purchase food. Now, usually those stores are more expensive and they require foreign currency. So they have to depend on people sending them money from abroad, which is, the biggest business for a dictatorship like Cuba is to let people go and live in exile. So that way they can send money back so their families could actually make it survive, get some food in the stores that are owned by the government, and the money keeps recycling, and they keep ownership of them. So yes, there's absolutely food in Cuba, especially for tourists. Let's take a look at this. Now, these are food options that are not available for Cubans. Take a look at these options. These are all reviews from Google. Tourist reviews from people that have gone to Cuba. You can see these are all Paradisos Princesa del Mar Resort, Meliá Marina Varadero, Meliá Buenavista. These are all resorts and hotels. Cubans don't have access to this food. If you see right in the middle there, what do you see? That's lobster, my friends. Lobster in Cuba is reserved for tourism and for export. So a regular Cuban cannot eat lobster because it is reserved for those people who are not Cuban. Simple as that. So yes, there is a lot of food in Cuba, absolutely. Rationed for Cubans, limited for the nationals, but yes, a lot of food for tourism and for export. Absolutely. There's so much food in Cuba, but let's make sure we get the facts straight. Let's take another look at the next slide here. Let's take a look at the next slide. We have more food, more reviews from Google, Manzana Kempinski. We have Iberoestar, Grand Packard. We have lots of food options that are not rationed, and they look really nice and tasty, yummy. Great reviews from tourists, but this food is not available for Cubans. Did you know that Cubans couldn't even set foot inside a Cuban hotel or a hotel in Cuba because, newsflash, there are collaboration between Cuba and foreign investors. Yes. You heard correctly. This food is not available to the regular Cuban. The regular Cuban, until a few years ago, could not even set foot in one of these hotels. It was prohibited for Cuban nationals to set foot in one of these hotels. Now they actually can set foot in these hotels, but who can actually afford these plates when the average salary is about $30 per month? So obviously this is out of reach for regular Cubans unless they actually get sponsored by someone who comes and takes them to one of these hotels to eat, or it's exclusive to tourists. Let's go ahead and continue. Let's go ahead and continue with this young man.
In fact, I would say that there's a much larger police presence here in New York City than there is in Havana, but that's a separate story.
Okay, so I want to stop there because it's not a separate story. See, why don't you see such a large military presence in the streets? Because you don't need one when you have the committees of the defense of the revolution. It's CDR, and I speak about this in one of my short videos that I did few years ago, or maybe 2 years ago. I'm not even sure, but I talk about it. Comité de Defensa Revolucionaria. And you could read it right here because that's the description. Committees for the Defense of the Revolution, okay, or CDR, are a network of neighborhood committees across Cuba. The organizations described as the eyes and ears of the revolution. Eyes and ears of the revolution. En cada cuadra, un comité. If you're Cuban, you know exactly what I'm talking about. A committee on each block. That means that each block has a CDR assigned person, a person who's an eyes and ears for the revolution. And what do? They exist to help support local communities and which means help indoctrinate and keep sending the propaganda, pushing that to the communities, helping to keep them entertained in the activities so they don't have any type of, time to think about actual issues that they need to resolve. And most importantly, report on counter-revolutionary activity. Report. The CDR's main job is to report. Now, of course, this person goes to Cuba on a temporary brigade tour and is shown and paraded, the softer side of Cuba. But were they there when Luis Manero de Alcántara, who right now is in prison, an activist, artist, was roaming down the streets and was constantly accosted by police officers? Does he understand that? Does this brigade individual, and do these brigades, do they know this? I think they do. They choose to ignore it because I believe there's an agenda. I believe that if a person knows the truth, because the truth is out here, and they choose to ignore it, they're just moving forward based on an agenda because it could so easily be debunked. Luis Manuel Otero Alcántara, again, being taken into a patrol car because every time he would roam the streets, he would get followed. And the same goes for activists. Oh, I don't see any high military activity. We see more police surveillance in New York City, my friend. See, as soon as Cubans hit the streets and say, Viva Cuba Libre, we don't want any more communism, you will see police activity. And you will see those activists being taken down by police and shot down if necessary, as they do have an order from the dictator. La orden de combate está dada. The combat order is given, word for word, verbatim, by Díaz-Canel, the Cuban dictator. We have this young woman who right now is in prison. Again, many people going to prison just for coming out on July 11th, J11th, okay, 2021. Just for requesting freedom, demanding freedom. She is in prison. I see activity there. I see police activity. We see Luis Robles in prison. What is he holding up? A sign that says libertad, freedom, no más represión, no more repression. Luis Robles is in prison for holding up that sign. The video is online. And there's police activity taking him because he held up a sign. This man, no record, no criminal record. Luis Robles is in prison for holding up a sign in Cuba. Talk to me about police activity and surveillance. Let's continue to listen to this young man.
Cuba is still underdeveloped in a lot of ways, but people there also have things that we don't have here in the far richer US, like free healthcare and free college. And this kind of begs the question, why was I told my whole life that Cuba was this horrible place?
Let's talk about free healthcare and free college. We're already 20 minutes into this. 20 some minutes, 19 some minutes. Oh, Lord. Free healthcare. These are signs. These are signs that are placed in Cuban clinics, policlínicos, okay, places of care, health care. And it says, su servicio de salud es gratuito, pero cuesta. Your health service is free, but it has a cost. And it has a list of the costs. It has atención de primera de salud, so primary care, and then it's got second level attention. And even though they don't charge you, they let you know that you are paying for it with your taxes. And this is supposedly the cost of each of the procedures. And it's on the walls. I've been to a Cuban hospital. I've been to a Cuban policlínico, and it's on the walls. As soon as you walk in, you see that on the walls. They're telling you it's not free. You're paying for it. But you know how else you pay for it? With your health, with your life. Because free healthcare in Cuba is only good. It's not even free for tourists, but it's only decent for tourists. And of course, for, higher command. Let's take a look at just a few of the videos that come out of Cuba denouncing the horrible conditions of the health system. Before I show you, people from the US and all over the world have to send their family medicines and vitamins because they don't have access to these things in Cuba. Regardless of what Michael Moore told you in the Sicko documentary, I want Michael Moore to come and talk to the people in exile and see how much medicine they have to send their families. They have to send them syringes because there aren't any syringes in Cuba. Saline solution, alcohol, just basic things. Oh, the embargo. No, these are things that are not included in the embargo. They're not sanctioned. But Cuba, the regime, needs to keep people in misery because that's the only way to control a people, by keeping them in misery. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of these videos.
60 años, trancar dominó, mira. Se acabó. 259, yo doble 2. Ya se acabó. 60 años, trancar dominó.
You can tell the hygiene in that hospital. That's a hospital where a mom had her son who had a brain tumor. Explain to me, how do you have a child with a brain tumor in a hospital under those conditions? See, propaganda tells you that Cuba has great life expectancy, greater than the US. Yeah, because Cuba will not disclose the reason for the people's deaths. More people die in Cuba than you know, and we know because our family members have died because they don't have access to medicine. And because the hygiene conditions are horrible. There is no hygiene in medical facilities in Cuba. Okay, let's take a look at another video. Operating room. Operating in the rain. Why not? I mean, they're singing and dancing in the rain. Why not operating in the rain? And there are still people who will excuse this and say, well, that happened. That could happen anywhere. That could just happen anywhere. That could happen anywhere, sure. And watch that person try to recover after that situation. Being operated on under those conditions. God knows how many bacteria you can actually derive. How many bacterial infections can derive from being under those circumstances. Let's take a look at another video. See, sad thing is that the sad thing is that people will still buy the propaganda, no matter how much evidence you show them of what's going on in Cuba. They will buy the propaganda And what bothers me is the fact that people like me who have been in Cuba and have smelled the bathrooms when you walk in the hospital restroom and you see that piercing urine smell, you sense it, it sticks to you, and it's nasty, and there's no water and there's no soap. And you look at that, and then you hear people say, healthcare in Cuba is great, it's state of the art, it's first world style. Why can't we have that in the US? And I am like, are you serious? The gaslighting is unbelievable because we have seen it and we have lived it, and it's insulting that people that go to Cuba on brigades to be indoctrinated by the regime turn around and in our faces say, no, your experience? No, we know different because we believe what they've taught us, and what you have lived doesn't count. Let's continue.
Why was I lied to and told that there was no food in Cuba? Why lie and say that it's this total police state? What did Cuba do to get this slanderous treatment from the United States? Because it's not like Cuba's really done anything to us. It's not like Cuba carpet bombed our country. They never occupied our cities with their military. They never tried to overthrow our government.
They've never tried to overthrow our government. Mm-hmm. Not obviously, not directly, but they sent agents here spying and corrupting the system of the US every single day. People are here roaming the streets, and they have a mission from Cuba. Yes. And not only in the US, in places like Colombia, where we see a communist person took power recently, Petro. In places like Nicaragua, where we have also a communist dictator. In places like Venezuela. You draw your own conclusions. Cuba sends people on a mission. You know those doctors they say they sent, a lot of these doctors sent with a mission to spread the communist ideology throughout the world. And the United States is not the exception, but yeah, well, go ahead and keep thinking that no one's ever attempted anything about, to overthrow the government.
Or anything like that. So why was it that everything I heard about Cuba since I grew up was 100% negative? And to me, the answer lies in history. Up until the Socialist Revolution, Cuba was basically a neo-colony of the United States, meaning that while Cuba's leaders were from Cuba, they were loyal to the interests of American investors.
Very interesting that they should mention that the interests were to foreign investors, because as far as I'm concerned, in Cuba, the only interest that matters today is that of foreign investors. See, let's just take a look at a few hotels here. Hotels, foreign investors that come to make these wonderful structures that Cubans don't have access to. Look at this. Be Live Hotels invests in Cuba. Be Live Experience, Varadero. Oh my goodness. That's a foreign investor. Oh, we have Meliá. Meliá has 33 hotels in Cuba. Can I say that again? Meliá, a foreign investor from Spain, has 33 hotels in Cuba. Look how they advertise it. The island with the biggest personality in the Caribbean in its heart, in the capital, Havana, a place you must see to take the true pulse of a destination that has aged extremely well. Really? It's aged extremely well? See, because what's falling on top of people's heads are not the hotels. Those are the buildings that nobody fixes, the buildings that nobody maintains. You know how many buildings crumble in Cuba and have been crumbling for years and nobody cares? Yet hotels are being built. Yet there are supplies to build hotels. And this company says that Cuba has aged so extremely well. They have 33 hotels in Cuba. Talk about a foreign investor. Let's go ahead and take a look at, MH Hotel Group, NH Hotel Group, NH Hotel Group. Oh, they have 2 hotels in Cuba. That's a foreign investor, right? I don't know what he's talking about. They have Accor. Let's see. Hotel Mercure Sevilla Havana. Oh, Accor has hotels in Cuba. That's a foreign investor, right? Who's this? Who's this person right here? Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a foreign investor. That's not a Cuban investor. No. Okay. Let's look at Royalton. Oh, Royalton. Yes, Royalton Havana. But that's also a foreign investor, though. That's also a foreign investor, though. I mean, what is he talking about? What is he talking about? These are the things that what is he talking about? Let's go ahead and continue listening to this young man.
From North America, and we visited all everything like that. So why was it that everything I heard about Cuba since I grew up was 100% negative? And to me, the answer lies in history. You know, up until the Socialist Revolution, Cuba was basically a neo-colony of the United States, meaning that while Cuba's leaders were from Cuba, they were loyal to the interests of American investors, not the Cuban people. So at the time, Cuba was basically this playground for these foreign investors. And, you know, they would buy out the Cuban sugar industry.
Cuba's still a playground for foreign investors. And Cuba's still a playground for most of Europe and many areas of the world. The US, well, it's restricted, and the best way you can go to Cuba right now is through these brigades. Cuba's still a playground. Katy Perry goes to Cuba to display the tobaccos and the salsa. Obama goes to Cuba, right? Went to Cuba. Madonna celebrates her birthday in Cuba. Beyonce, Rihanna, all these people, you know, give the propaganda that Cuba, hey, wonderful place. Wonderful place.
They would buy out the mining industry, and they would get rich off of Cuba's resources, and then they would vacation there. And they would have Cubans drive them around and bring them drinks and dance for them. In other words, everyone was enjoying and plundering Cuba's wealth except for the Cuban people.
Really? You mean like all the foreign investors that we just saw, all the hotels that are foreign, that host foreign people to come to Cuba and eat lobster, the lobster that we saw Cubans cannot eat because it's reserved for foreigners and export, so foreigners.
And this is exactly the type of society that Fidel Castro and his rebel army fought to overthrow, and they did.
And they did, because this is a society that they wanted for themselves. For themselves. They overthrew the society so they could own everything and just distribute what they wanted among themselves.
And when they did, they recreated Cuban society on a socialist basis. So they said the needs of Cubans should come first and the needs of these foreign investors should come last.
And that's why tourists can go to Cuba and drink all the milk they want, but a 7-year-old child in Cuba gets milk cut off because you don't get milk after 7 years old. Or was it 5? I believe it's 7. Yeah, that's why, because Cubans' needs come first. That's why. Yep, that's why. Cubans can go on tour in a boat. I mean, tourists can go on tour in a boat, but Cubans can't take a boat tour, a catamaran, a yacht tour. No. Cubans can't do that because I guess Cubans' needs come first.
And actually, the first thing Fidel did when he came into power was he took these vast swaths of land that these foreign investors owned, and he gave it to people with no land.
Which people with no land did he give that to? My grandfather didn't get anything. Which people with no land did he give that land to? Because as far as I know, all the land in Cuba is owned by the government. It's owned by the institution, by the system. So who exactly did he give it to?
You know, they took over people's mansions and they gave them to people with no homes.
Yes, they did. And you know, a lot of these weren't even mansions per se. They were just homes, nice homes. Not every nice home is a mansion. And they belonged to not only Americans, no, but many Cubans that had small businesses, lawyers, teachers, hairdressers that had their own salon and had their nice home as fruit of their hard work. And what did Fidel do? Yeah, he took people from the country that did have homes. They weren't homeless. They weren't homeless. He took them from places where they were in the country with latrines and gave them these homes, nice homes, that they hadn't worked for, but the people that owned them had, and said, here, we're going to give these to the people. How about the people that worked for that home, that worked hard for their business? How about those people? Why didn't Fidel develop an infrastructure where the poor people that he brought from the country, from their poor homes, because they did have homes, they were just really poor, why didn't he develop a structure where those people could farm freely and become successful and wealthy as fruit of their farming and labor? No, because Cubans can't farm freely. Oh, okay, that's why. But I thought he cared about the Cubans first. And I'm still, maybe I missed something.
And this was Cuba's original sin. They ended the foreign looting of its country and its people.
They ended which foreign looting? Because as far as I'm concerned, as I just showed you, foreign investors still come to Cuba and have Cubans dance for them, while Cubans don't have access to any of the things that tourists have access to in Cuba.
People. Immediately after they did this, the U.S. imposed a blockade on Cuba, which...
It's not a blockade. Let's use the correct terminology, because blockade is propaganda terminology. Cuba has an embargo. And as this young man has stated, the embargo was placed because Fidel expropriated property that didn't belong to him, belonged to American investors, yes, that had business in Cuba, that generated a lot of jobs for people in Cuba, but also he took the businesses and properties of Cubans as well. So no, he didn't just say, oh, I'm going to just take over everything foreign because foreign people are taking over. No, he took Cuban property as well. But since he did take a lot of American property, the United States said, we're not having it, and placed an embargo, an economic embargo, not a blockade, because a blockade would be military. And being that they're so military inclined, since they're brigades and all, they should know that a blockade involves actual military ships at sea surrounding the area, blocking literally the in and out traffic, but there's no blockade. There's an embargo that was placed as a result of Fidel expropriating things that didn't belong to him coming from a wealthy family himself.
Prevented it from trading with the outside world. And this policy, which is still in place, by the way.
Trading from the outside world, yes. Cuba can trade with so many countries. Cuba can trade with every country out there except the US. You know which trading is limited for Cubans? Trading amongst themselves. Cubans can't trade amongst themselves. If you have a cow and it gives you milk, the government comes down and makes sure that they know how much milk you're giving. Your cow's giving. Make sure that you're not keeping more than they can allow you to keep, and that you're providing the share to the government, as it is expected and demanded of everyone in a communist dictatorship such as Cuba,
is designed to crush the Cuban economy. You can just read documents that say that explicitly.
Yes, absolutely. The embargo was to push the Cuban economy, but even with the embargo, Cuba could have thrived if it wanted to. It just did not want to.
And it would do this by causing shortages of goods and thereby undermining support for the Cuban Revolution. So why do this? Why strangle a country's economy?
The US decided not to trade with Cuba. Cuba could have continued to thrive. All that empty land in Cuba, farm it. Farm it. Put it to good use. Why won't they?
And knowingly cause suffering. And I think the answer is, if people knew the truth about Cuba, if people knew that they took.
Here we are as exiles telling you the truth about Cuba. We are telling you the truth about Cuba. Which part are you not understanding? Which part are people not understanding? We are telling you based on experience that we lived. We're telling you the truth about Cuba. You that go there for 2 weeks on a brigade that is orchestrated by the regime so they can show you exactly what they want to show you so you can go out and spew to the world this little propaganda based on a filtered and altered and manicured view meant to manipulate you. How is that the truth about Cuba? We are the truth about Cuba. We are the voices of those who have survived and escaped the Cuban regime. Stop gaslighting the exile. That's very disrespectful.
Took a society that was dominated by the rich and turned it into a society that served the poor.
No, it turned a society, it wasn't perfect, but it turned everybody poor. And it's still dominated by the rich. It's still very much dominated by the rich. Absolutely. Do you have any doubts? See, let's take a look at this because, the embargo, the cruel economic embargo, let's look at Cuba gets goods from the US every single year. In 2021, the US exported 309 million to Cuba. No, that doesn't seem to be too blocked. The main products that the US exported to Cuba, poultry meat, because Cubans eat American chicken, right? Okay. Soybeans, why can't Cubans just plant soybeans or plant beans there? I'm pretty sure they could grow. And this other thing, okay, I can't read this properly. Here we go. Let me zoom in. Phosphonates and phosphonates. Okay, so what are phosphonates and phosphonates? We're going to take a look at that in a moment. But what did Cuba export to the US? Cuba exported paintings. The main products that Cuba exported to were paintings, sculptures, and prints. Well, that doesn't seem too blocked. It seems to me there's a business there. And since everything that's architectural and historical and all these prints are being sold, like exported to who's getting commission for that? Because I'm pretty sure it's a government organization that's controlling these exports. Who's getting commission for that? I'm pretty sure that the artworks of Luis Manuel Otero Alcantara, who's in prison right now, are not being exported, and he's not receiving any commission for that. Now is he? It still benefits the rich. Now, what are these items? It says here that phosphonates and phosphonates are part of inorganic chemicals. They include sodium triphosphate, calcium, and all those big words, just to tell you that They're used in the production of detergents as a flame retardant and corrosion inhibitor. Okay, so these are things that the U.S. is sending to Cuba. It's exporting to Cuba these things, along with chicken and soybeans and corn. Did you know that corn is also sent from the U.S. to Cuba? Okay, I thought you should know. But, Cuba is still controlled by the rich. Cayo Piedra, just one of the many places that exist in Cuba. It's a private island of Fidel Castro and his family. Cuba is still dominated by the rich, while the people in the streets are poor and they struggle to eat and they have rationed foods. Fidel Castro's legacy lives at large. And so does the appointed dictator Díaz-Canel, who we see here wearing what? What is that? Oh, okay. Is that a Rolex? That doesn't seem too modest. That's a Rolex, right? And okay, this is modest. This is $1,000-something. Come on, guys. This man's modest. Pobrecito. Look at him. So very modest. Look at his car. Is that a Lexus? Where's the blockade here? Where's the blockade? Is that a Lexus? Oh, okay, that's a Lexus. Oh, that's a nice car. That's not what the Cubans drive, though. Most Cubans don't drive. Yeah, most Cubans walk. Yeah, they walk or they have a bicycle. Yeah, that's kind of how it works. Meanwhile, let me show you, though, because this is Fidel Castro's grandson.
Y'all say you do it, share, like.
Mercedes. Oh, that's a Mercedes. Let's take a closer look at that Mercedes.
Cuando hay que sacar estos jugueticos que tenemos en casa, ¿me entienden? Graba adelante, mami, para que vean cómo esto se come en la carretera. Graba aquí la aguja. Parece que el motor es V6, papi, ¿no? Mira qué rico eso como a 1.40, caero. Esto es cosa gorda, mi gente. Para que no se equivoquen. Y de pinta feo, ¿verdad?
That's a Mercedes, huh? Now, how come every single regular Cuban cannot take a Mercedes to Cuba or a Lexus to Cuba, but Díaz-Canel can? But the Castro grandchildren can, huh? Well, let's take a look at this. Who's this? Oh, this is Cangrejo. Oh, this is the grandson of Raúl Castro, Fidel's brother. Oh, the legacy continues. Oh, millionaire life. Let's see. Let's just, I'm not going to bore you. What is this? Oh, because he's in a yacht. Oh, he has a yacht. It's a yacht. Oh, that's a party? Parties in a yacht? Yeah, okay. Oh, abundance. Oh, that's abundance. Okay. Food that is not rationed. No, that's not rationed. Not that I can tell. You were saying?
All the profits hoarded by the rich and redistributed to the people who actually worked, people might look at their own reality here in the United States, where 140 million people are in or near poverty, and then look at these rich parasites living high off of our sweat and our labor and think to themselves, well, why can't we do the same thing here? So the United States has to sabotage and lie about the Cuban Revolution, because if people were to see socialism succeeding in Cuba, people would want socialism here.
Socialism succeeding in Cuba. There's nothing successful about socialism in Cuba. There's nothing successful about socialism anywhere, because when you centralize everything through the government, through the system, through the institution, things shatter. And the wealthy still the powerful, and the poor is still the people. Open your eyes. Make sure that you have all the facts and that you listen to the voices of the people that have been the victims of this system in Cuba. Now, I don't want to get into the conversations about the people that are going to come with the misinformation, but what about the countries in Europe? Those are socialist countries. Those are capitalist economies. Yes, they have high subsidized programs that are social programs. That is not socialism. Please be better informed. And this conversation in particular is about Cuba, a communist island in the Caribbean with millions of people that are being oppressed on a daily basis. Stop gaslighting the exiles. Stop. It's nasty. It's disrespectful. It's hurtful. We have lived a reality that you can't deny. And yet, these people sit here and say, your reality is not the truth. The truth is our ideological fantasy. That's what matters. And that's disgusting. I hope that you found this valuable. I hope that you found it helpful in understanding what really goes on in Cuba and seeing how these organizations are manipulated by the Cuban regime, because nobody sets foot in Cuba to take a tour of anything. No American sets foot in Cuba to take a tour of any institution, of any clinic, school, auto body shop, hairdresser. No one, unless it is strictly supervised and planned beforehand by the Cuban regime. Thank you for watching.